Welcome back. You're still watching tonight, and it's time that we want to have a conversation with the educationists themselves. Dr. Kileme Mwire is a former Assistant Minister of Education, but also Managing Director, Africa at education.org. We have Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa from Usawa Agenda, Executive Director there, and Dr. John Mugo, Executive Director at Zizi Africa. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Sam.
Right, and I mean, what a historic day, even as the Cabinet Secretary Ezekiel Machogu noted that we're coming to the end of an examination that was first sat in 1985. For you, Dr. Mwire, what are your reflections on those 39 years, how far it has come despite the evolutions within the period?
Well, you know, I would say, first I've said before, Getuko, here, that it's all right to change education systems, but an education system is as good as what you put in. So I am not a great advocate of just changing for the sake of it, because I'm a believer in that. Changing education systems is not like moving it from one house to another. For me, the question to ask is, has the 844 system been useful in terms of, for those that have gone through it? Has it been useful in terms of producing the human resources that we need for this country, both the private and public sector? And I would say yes. I think it's been good. And I'm not so convinced that there was any need to change. But I think we've come far. It's been a good system. It has served us right. Some of the greatest innovators in this country, the people that run this economy, and a lot of the people in politics, and some of the best professionals come from that system, including people like you, people like Mogo, people like Dr. Manyasa. So, and I tell you, I started teaching at the university when we were in the first batch of 844, so we were in the double intake. And I can tell you, those young men were bright. They were quite good. So I would say it's been great. And I am not convinced that, changing the system was necessary, because I know if we wanted, we could have put as much as we have in the new system into the existing system without having to spend too much time and energy and all the logistical issues that we are confronted with now.
Interesting start to the show. But Dr. Manyasa, Dr. Mugo, you've been accused that you've gone through the system. When did you sit your KCPE, Dr. Manyasa?
You are asking me to announce my age on national TV, but I will. 1988. 88. Yeah, so we were the fourth cohort of 844. And so today I am nostalgic. I feel good about the very many things that were good that have happened in that system, which is why today, for the first time, I want to celebrate KCPE achievers. I want to celebrate a girl from my village. She's called Jacinta Kasungu. She was number 2 nationally in the country. And I am very proud of her, and I want to celebrate that. That is not to say I'm changing my position on the fact that we have always said we don't want this very exam-oriented system. So I also rule the opportunity that we have missed of building on 844. I think we missed many opportunities of harnessing that system much better and getting much more out of it. And I also feel good that today we are marking the resolution of the debate on whether the transition is happening or not.
Right.
Because today tells everyone, yes, the transition is happening, so that we can now focus our national energies on fixing the challenges that are in the incoming system, rather than looking back and saying, we will not be changing. Now, today, the issue is settled.
Okay. All right. Dr. Mogo, you'll be telling me which KCPE you sat, but also there has been, I mean, it started off as the system that was going to give people practical skills to build careers. Is it the same thing we have today?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I sat also for the 1988, so cohort 4 of 844. And I wish to correct my teacher, Dr. Mwire, because we ought not to have been calling this 844. Because the 844 that Emmanuel and I did, we were recalling today how home science was such a big thing, and how one of the practical things we did for our KCPE was how to wash sweaters, and you don't hang a sweater vertically, you hang it this way so that it doesn't stretch. then they kept on reaping one practical subject after another, and the last was in the year 2000. So this curriculum that is ending, I think, I don't even know what name it should have been given, because it's not 844. It's something that was born out of confusion, out of negligence by government, not investing, and letting children down. But on that point, I wish to celebrate this last cohort of that system that I don't know what it is, because this cohort has shown a lot of resilience, honestly. Because mopping the system is not easy. We were in Form 1 when the other system were in Form 6, and we observed in the same school how difficult it was also for that cohort. And so being the last, knowing that if anything happened to you, if you're hospitalized and you don't catch up, you have nowhere to fall back. I think is a very precarious situation. But also, this is the cohort that was putting on shorts in the same school when the cohort, others are putting on trousers and they were behind you. So I think the resilience that this class has shown is something commendable and worth celebrating. But coming to Emmanuel's point and Dr. Mwiria's point that we ought to have also bettered something, not just mopping them, because these are millions also when we count now the ones that have done KCPE and all up to Form 4.
Right. We
cannot continue with wastage of now 4 million plus, because there was no time. So the rote learning that they still have to endure for another 4 years and all that, I think is something that we ought to address to better what can be bettered, even as they move on to mop the old system.
Okay.
Yeah, just to say, I'm not in disagreement with what Mogo says.
Yes.
And the fact that I said 844 served as right does not mean that it can't be improved. So obviously, I mean, now we're in another system, and I've said before, now that we are in it, let's figure out how best we can make it. And one of the strongest aspects of this system is what we have witnessed with the release of the results. Right. That KCPE is about sitting one exam out of 8 years. Hopefully, if we go by what is being recommended by CBC, there'll be exams throughout the system, so that you don't judge a child by how well they do in one day. So that is great. But essentially, the point I was making when I was saying an education system is as good as you make it, is that CBC does not have to differ so much from 844. We could have done a lot of the same things with 844 system of education. Forget what you call the structure. I went through an earlier system, and people tell you went through that. There was a great system. It served the country well. So every system will serve the country well. It depends on what you put in it in terms of resources, the teaching facilities, the people that teach in it, what curriculum you've got, and what you do with the products of that system.
Right. And Dr. Manyasa, if you were to look at the results at a glance, well, I don't know why NEC never really gives us the marks between 50% and above, or 50% and below. They give us ranges of 100 marks. But you find that 46.49% of the class, just almost half, scored between 200 and 299 marks. But if I talk about the entire class, then you have a whole 75% scoring less than 300 marks. So 300 would be the average of 60% and above. But again, you also have more than 27%, more than a quarter, scoring less than 200 points. What does this tell us? Yes, there has been a debate that we need to shift from examination-based to skills-based, and probably that's where we're headed. But still, if this is a yardstick, what is it telling us?
It is just telling us about the inequities in our education system. It would be very interesting to analyze where these children who have scored, the 27% who have scored below 200 marks are. You'll find they are from certain geographies in the country, they are from certain household types in terms of income levels. You will also find that some of them are actually children with learning disabilities that were never diagnosed. You find children who have scored actually less than 100 marks. You've just been given this below 200, but there are many children with below 100.
Right.
And in my view, some of those are children with learning disabilities that were never diagnosed. And so they have been taken through the normal processes with other children, yet they needed to be taken through special education, special needs programs. So I think that there is need to dig deeper into this so that we can be able to respond to the specific drivers of the low performance that we observe in a significant section of the candidates.
Yeah. And Dr. Mugo, you look at the top candidate, Michael, he got 428. That's an average of 85.6 points in every, well, it's an average. Yet in the same cohort, there's a student who scored 85 points in total.
In total.
What is that? Is it even possible if people are going through the same system?
The one additional statistic I think we should highlight is that while in the entire population is 27% or 1 in 3 that got below 200, when you look at the ones with special needs, it's actually 52%. So we already start to deduce what Dr. Manyasa is saying, that this exam is like what that example given of judging all animals by climbing a tree, including fish, and putting that as a standard. We know that this academic-only exam is fit only for 10% of the population. So the 90% is escorting 10%, and we are tolerating that as a system. I think it's pretty frustrating for people, for children who are unable to keep up with an education that is not designed for them. And this one who gets 85 out of 500, so is it the learner that has failed, or is it the system? And I would argue it's actually the system, because we knew from the time they were in grade 1 that they would fail. We know from the Uwezo assessment that Emmanuel does, we know that if you go to grade 4 and give them a reading assessment of grade 3, only 40% will read at grade 3 level, meaning 60% are escorting 44% already in grade 4. So I don't know why we are tolerating this to frustrate children when we should actually address things like now early identification and assessment, having a screening that catches some of these disabilities very early, even as they go to PP1, but also holding the grade 1 teacher to account when they are pushing these children to grade 2. So we removed the grade reputation policy, which was really a good thing, a very progressive move, but we went to automatic progression with no accountability. So I can knit a sweater the whole year as a grade 2 teacher, because at the end of the year, they are going to grade 3, and it's not my business. So I don't know how we start interrogating some of these policies, because the results we get today, it's also because we are lacking policies and accountability mechanisms to protect these children, but also to see what they are good at, so that we are able to level ground for all children.
I'll get you, Dr. Mwiria, but first, Dr. Manyasa, from studies, because sometimes you've reported about KCSE results and you're looking at how that cohort performed in KCPE, and usually there are some that fall off the system. But do we know if how you perform in KCSE has a correlation on how you perform in KCPE has a correlation in how you perform KCSE, and is it even possible with the system that is exiting to make an intervention somewhere?
It is possible to make an intervention. The only problem that arises is that these marks in KCPE will allocate you a certain category of a secondary school. And so if you have scored low marks in KCPE, you will end up in a sub-county secondary school. Most of our sub-county secondary schools face massive resource constraints. They don't have teachers, they don't have laboratories, they don't have libraries, they have fewer children, so they are receiving very little money in terms of capitation, and they are unable, therefore, to invest in anything. I was speaking to a principal of one of the sub-county schools in my home place, and she told me, you see, I don't just face the constraint of lack of teachers. I have 4 teachers posted by the government. I have employed another 4 by the boards of management, but every time I have tuned these 4 BOM teachers, the government announces recruitment of teachers, and these 4 go to be hired by TSC, and I have to recruit new ones to replace them and start tuning them afresh. So in the meantime, this learner's time is passing. So these schools face many constraints. And so now the KCPE marks places in a place where you don't get support that you need to even bridge the gap that you may have had in the beginning. So that just compounds.
Right.
But by the time you're in Form 4, the gap has compounded.
And Dr. Mwiria, passionate about equality. So we're talking about nearly, let's just say 70%, are likely to land at institutions that are underfunded, the resources are not sufficient, the facilities are not sufficient, and they're expected to compete with everyone else. Why this? Why? Because you've been in government as an assistant minister. Why doesn't government see these? Or even if they do, why don't they act?
Well,
improving facilities.
Yeah, thank you. And first, I'd like to congratulate the minister because, in a sense, by not announcing the top students and the top schools, is in a sense addressing this problem. Because when you prepare, when you bring some schools and say that these are the best schools, these are the best kids, you are forgetting the fact that the majority cannot nearly do as well, just like you said. The very majority are down there. So when, and I also want to blame, television stations because they go picking the very best kids and, they are celebrating all over the place. What you are doing is that you are demeaning the very majority, and it's not their fault that they didn't do as well as those. So the system really is a total injustice. It's a complete injustice. And, and if you look even more closely now at what will happen in terms of who will progress to what kind of school. The majority of these kids from these schools, the majority of the kids will go to day schools. 8,000 straight A's will go to national schools and a few others. But even the national schools that are popular are few. They are the premier national schools, the 23 old ones. So the majority of the kids, you have to ask yourself, if they can go to these day schools, because that's what will happen, what future do they have, given that, as we know, going by the KCSE results of last time, out of 12,200 secondary schools, only 5,500 schools and a student who scored at C+. Most schools did not have a C+. So it means, most schools are condemned, not even to a university place. So this is a serious problem, and we need to address it. And I've argued, for a long time, that if we want to make the playing field level, we cannot judge a kid from a public school the same way as we judge one from an academy. And there are many reasons for that, as you know. And therefore, if the 400s are going to go to national schools, for me, if you get 350 and above, you should be entitled to a national school if you come from a public school. This way, even parents will have faith in the public primary schools. Right now, even teachers who teach in public schools don't keep their children in the schools that they teach, which is a serious irony, that you teach in a public school, you don't have faith in the school, you send your kids to an academy because you are a parent, you wish the best for your kid. So we have to find a way of really, making this field level, especially in terms of how you admit. But we must come up with a mechanism that is not likely to be abused, because you can also talk about a quota system that is abused. So that we have to deal with. But the point is, but of course, in the long term, we need to ensure that public schools can compete, that they have the resources they need, they have the teachers they need, and the kids.
And that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
What is the solution there? Because the reason why teachers will take their sons and daughters to a private school is because there are facilities there. Why wouldn't the government invest resources to improve a sub-county school so that it has almost the same sort of exposure, just like a national school? Yeah,
when we were in the ministry, we argued for a case of like 2 national schools in every county. And now we have national schools in every county. But I have gone further than that. I would say we should have top schools in every sub-county in this country. So the solution actually in the public schools is to ensure that they have the resources. I mean, they have to have the teachers, they have to have the facilities. And of course, in addition to that, you have to ensure that what happens there is supervised enough, that time is not lost. We are told a lot of the time, teaching time is lost in public schools because, some of these teachers are doing other things. But the point is to make the only way to make a public school attractive is to invest in it. I can tell you in the 60s and 70s, parents were not interested in sending their children to academies because the public schools were good and competitive.
Right.
You know, even there was a time in Nairobi when Olympic Primary School, a public school, used to be the best in Nairobi. That is gone. It is because these schools do not get the attention that they deserve. And as a result, those who can afford it now opt to go to academies.
Right. Dr. Mugo, how has the teacher evolved over time? Because majority of the teaching fraternity now are people that went through the 844 system. But also that system has had its own phases in terms of certain subjects withdrawn, reduction of examinable subjects. Certain subjects are offered but not examined. Eventually, they're not even offered. How has that teacher transitioned? And are they now fully capable to deliver the new system that CBC is?
Yeah, thanks. It's actually been pretty frustrating to see what happened in 1984, 85, 86 replaying now with the junior secondary. Because what was happening then after this system came in 1983, there were no music teachers, there were no woodwork teachers, and so there had to be a rapid mechanism of trying to upgrade some teachers. Like I remember when I went to Form 1, I reported with the teacher who was promoted from a primary school. We reported together in the high school because the secondary school was starting music. And so there was a lot of mess. And now to see what has happened, even though we started this in 2016, we knew that by this time we will require teachers of certain subjects and with certain capacities, but the system has been so overwhelmed year by year, catching up. We are here now, and we know that in 2 years we will have the senior secondary school. That the schools will need to be recategorized, now not national or extra county, now to serve those streams, and that the school that becomes a sports academy will require certain facilities and certain teachers. And so this playing catch up, I think now speaking as a teacher is pretty frustrating because you're not equipped well enough. And I feel it for the teachers that have had to brave now a 1 year of the year 7, when they were not prepared. You are just appointed and you need to report and teach.
Right.
And also what now we are seeing is also now trying to adjust the learning areas, removing some areas, learning areas that are actually ought to be at the heart of the new curriculum in the philosophy of it, like physical education and so on, or life skills have now to be reduced. So I think the teacher preparation, what ought to happen is that we should have started in 2016 also with the pre-service teacher reform. Because by now, that is already 7 years ago, we would have many new generation teachers that are prepared to teach for the middle level, for the higher level, and so on.
Do we have that?
We don't have that because the pre-service teacher reform came only 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's why Getuko, sorry Mogo, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's why there are those in academic, in education, circles who say that we needed more preparation. And I would say the same for 844, and unfortunately a lot of education decision making can also be political. The thing is, if you talk about teachers, remember CBC has not yet got into the university. The university is supposed to prepare the teachers to teach in secondary schools. So planning is critical. And this is, the point I began at when I was saying, it's an education system. It's not good if you don't prepare for it and put whatever you need to make sure it succeeds. And this is a subject that hasn't confronted, because if you play catch up, those areas that are better resourced, and it may as well happen. We are now being told private schools are very well prepared. They don't have a problem. What about the public schools? So I agree with Mogo that planning, ensuring we have the right resources, and that there is some kind of equity across the country in terms of the facilities. You can go to Garissa, you can go to those places. It's very difficult to, to do some of the things that are being required of by CBC. Not that it's a bad system. It's just that it requires, it required a little bit more planning and more preparation.
And to just again clarify from a teacher's perspective that CBC is actually not a new curriculum. It is a new way of educating. So the content is basically the same, only that I know that children now need other skills, and rather than waiting for those skills to be produced later on when you go to employment, it's when you are now going for team building activities because you need teamwork. It needs to be part of. So when I'm teaching biology or I'm teaching social studies or a certain learning area, I know that I am also developing collaborative skills. I'm developing creativity and innovation. I'm teaching them how to communicate. So it is actually the success of this, what we are doing now as CBC, is pegged on the teacher, rather than on so many other things. So investment in the teacher is a key most thing to have this succeed. We can talk about implementation challenges and all that from here to North Pole, but the issue is it is requiring a new type of a teacher who is able to navigate all this and not be the center of attraction like it was earlier on, keep quiet, look at me, but unleash, create an environment where children thrive and like flowers, sprout.
Dr. Manyasa, are we already seeing that? There are several studies that have been done showing that learners are in school, but they're not learning because when you give them different tests, they are failing. Okay, you're not supposed to say failing, but they are not meeting the expectations. Are there studies that are being done to show if the new competency-based curriculum is yielding the results? Have you had an opportunity to look, for instance, at the KCPE outcomes for last year?
No, we haven't. We haven't looked at the KCPE results for last year because, again, those were not supposed to be public. They are supposed to be informing the schools in terms of how the children are faring and how ready they are for the next level. It's not really supposed to be like what we've seen in KCPE today. But we do our own studies. We conduct learning assessments, and we are assessing children using grade 3 curriculum and looking at the children in grade 4 to see whether they have met or exceeded expectations. And I don't want to preempt what we have done, what we have observed this year, because we are just analyzing data. Okay. But from what we did in 2021, there was no improvement. Children were not improving, even with the new system. And just to insist that there are several things affecting learning at the school level. One is just an ethical issue. We could look at academies in this country, and majority of the private schools in this country are low cost. We have very few high cost private primary schools. Majority are low cost. They are employing teachers straight from college. In fact, those teachers go there and work so hard so that when they are posted by TSC, they say now they have slaved enough. It's now time to rest, because they work there while still queuing for TSC appointment. Why are those academies performing better than public schools that have more experienced teachers, more experienced school leaders? Some of those academies are just owned by John and myself here, who may not. John is a teacher. They are owned by people who are not even teachers. And the guy just brings young teachers from college, manages them, and they are doing better than public schools. There is an issue that we need to interrogate there. How is that? Because those academies are paying their teachers less than public school teachers. They have less experienced teachers. Right. They have less experienced managers in terms of educational philosophy and qualification. Why are they exceeding public schools? There's an issue that we need to speak about. There's an issue of staffing. We have schools in this country with more teachers than they need. We have very many schools with barely any number of teachers than they need. So how will that affect learning in those schools? You remember recently we had teachers in this town who were camping at the TSC saying, we want to be transferred from this region so we can't continue working there. They were told, you are back there or you're being sacked. Right. Okay, if that teacher goes back, what mechanism do you have of guaranteeing that they will do the right thing in the school where you have told them, go back or pick your termination letter? And they were expressing some reasons for wanting to leave. So we have failed to address comprehensively the issue of staffing of schools, ensuring that the numbers are manageable in those schools, because we have schools where we have 100 children. In fact, some of them in junior school, 100 children with one teacher. What are you expecting? What miracle are you expecting from this teacher? I think, and it's not that we don't know. Sometimes I feel it is almost criminal. We know these problems, we know the solutions, but we just don't care. As Dr. Mwire has mentioned, some of the people have said, for as long as I have taken my child to a place where I'm sure they are being taken care of, this other one I can keep saying we are doing something about it, while doing nothing about it. And these children we are doing nothing about are the majority in this country. I have told some colleagues that yes, there's no learning happening in junior school. Most junior school, there's no learning happening, and people just don't want to own up. But whether we teach these children or we don't, as a generation, they will produce doctors. They will produce engineers, regardless of whether we teach them or we don't. Question is, which kind of engineers will they produce? And which kind of doctors will they produce? We are so Kenyan that first we build a road, and after 10 or 15 or 20 people have been knocked down by cars, then we realize we needed a footbridge over that road. And yet a feasibility study was done to say, this area is populated, there are so many people living this side, this side, they will be crossing. But we need to see people knocked down. We shouldn't do that with education, because a mess in education reproduces itself down the road. These children will become the teachers of the next generation. If we haven't prepared them enough, what will they do to the next generation? It will reproduce itself in very bad ways.
Yeah, I just want to comment on this issue about the teacher.
Yes.
And you know, why is it that we continue to have this problem in public schools? And you know, it's an important issue, because even with the kinds of conditions that public schools are going through, there are public schools that are doing well. You know, if you go to day schools, also there are day schools that do better even than boarding schools. So there are some schools that are more effective than the others. So what is it? You know, apart from, you know, teacher staffing, and it's high time we also ask questions about what makes some schools more effective than others, and pick from that, because we can learn from those experiences. Is it the way they're managed? Certainly, you know, I'm sure that plays a role. Is it the way time is used? You know, is it the way they're supervised by the seniors? Because it is not, it doesn't make any sense for a private academies, you know, in a rural area. And I agree with Dr. Manyasa that, you know, a lot of the academies are small and private and they don't do as well. That to do so much better than a public school that is well endowed with teachers, and they're not doing as well. So there is something. And I think management is a critical issue. And management, not just in terms of how the time is used, but also what about the resources that go to those schools? There are books, you know, government is giving books, government is giving grants, and you know, all the, you know, a lot of the resources that have, the question therefore is, are the resources that go to a lot of our public schools? This is an important question that we must address it. We must not be afraid. Are the resources being used for purposes which they are meant? In a lot of cases, when we went to school, we used to say a teacher sometimes is 70% of the job that is required. But the teacher needs to have minimum. And the teacher needs to be able to manage the time, the personnel, and the resources that they got. So these are important questions we should ask. I think if we managed our resources properly, I am sure the performance of public schools would be 30–40% better than it is.
But Dr. knowing that this has been the situation for so many years now, the private schools are performing the way they are because the management is close. So the owner is closely linked with the management in terms of the headship of this institution. But the government also has an employer. The government schools have an employer. And there are institutions up to the county level, sub-county level to even supervise these institutions. Where is the missing link that all this is happening And it's sort of government doesn't know?
Some government knows, and the case is now secondary schools. When it comes to KCSE, the top 10 schools are not private schools. You know, maybe one, you know, Strathmore here and all that, but there are now these very safely guarded schools that you know, the few that government owns and prioritizes. Those schools, if you look at data, for instance, on quality assurance, and which schools are visited how many times a year, you know, you'll find that there's a 76% of schools that have not been visited in the last 3-4 years. So the government owns a few schools, secondary schools. We push there the brightest students. When a teacher does well in one school, we push them there. When we identify a principal who does very well, we take them to Kapsabet, we take them to Mangu and these other places. So if that ownership was distributed, and the spirit of equity, and especially looking that there's the schools that are less endowed, is also where children from poorer families go. So it is like a very well-designed structure to maintain the status quo, favor a few people. You know, they will become leaders, and they'll come back and they take their children because they are well connected to those very good schools, and the rest of the population remains where they are. So it's, when you talk about equity, actually, it's a very sad thing to see how resources are appropriated to favor those that are already favored. And I think this as Dr. Mweria called it, a justice issue. It is actually a social justice issue.
And talking about teachers, you know, some schools are so privileged that there are more teachers than they need. I mean, you know, if you go to Alliance High School, they will have a lot of, you know, teachers. And Mogo said, a good principal is distributed back to the same performing schools. And a bad principal is transferred to a school that is doing badly. So that already intensifies an existing problem. But the issue of supervision is critical in terms of, you know, government. You know, if you go to counties and, you know, county directors of education and sub-county directors of education, they'll probably complain, look, we don't have the resources, we don't have fuel, we don't have vehicles. But the issue of supervision is very critical. If you don't supervise, you know, the headmasters of principals of schools, head teachers and their teachers have no responsibility to ensure that they perform, especially when they are, to perform to their best, especially when they are assured of salaries anyway. I think private schools owe their teachers much more to account. You know, you are really expecting to produce. Do
you think it's possible to do the same?
It is possible.
More closely with public institutions?
Yes, and that has to be, that is what needs to be done. And if we want, if we don't want to convert all our schools in this country to some small, you know, low-cost private academies, we really, you know, have to have an emergency action on the public schools. I think we have to redeem them, and something needs to be done, and it's got to be drastic. And it's got to do with supervision, because, as I said earlier on, the resources are there, they have teachers. It is not, you know, it's not just that, but whether or not those resources are managed the way they should is a critical issue. And honestly, it's up to the government, because, you know, government is about the majority, and we cannot ignore the majority and, you know, just let those who can pay for themselves. Because if you go to the main towns now, the main schools that are coming up are academies, are private schools. Because parents who can afford will take their kids there. So government has to do something for the majority in any case, and government is for the majority. And this is a hustler government. You know, the best way to really live up to that promise is to ensure where 90% of the kids are in school is where you put the most resources. After all, governments are about popularity, about numbers. So if you do, you know, the best for the majority, I think it will be replicated even in, you know, when it comes to elections. So really, it is this, there needs to be a Marshall Plan about our public school system.
You know, Dr. Manyasa, the reason I'm asking that question is because if you look at how we spend resources in this country, 628 billion shillings going to education sector for the current financial year, and that's about nearly 30% of the revenues collected in this country. To break it down, half of that goes to pay teachers. These teachers are teaching at secondary schools and primary schools. So if 50% is going to basic education on the side of teaching, leave alone the capitation and what have you, there has to be value for money.
Let me remind my senior, Dr. Kilemi, that there's something you need to read. It's called the Iron Law of Oligarchy. The more the masses participate in politics, the less they influence the outcome. It's just influenced by a handful. And that handful is what is influencing the way we allocate resources. It's not the voter. The voter down there votes when the decision has been made that the candidate is...
But I'm saying the one who is voted for should.
Yeah, but he's held by... It's a long story that I will want you to read and we discuss elsewhere.
So in a sense, you're saying it's not possible?
The masses don't influence the results, and so the elected doesn't respond to the needs of the masses. It responds to the needs of the few who influence the decision. And sorry if I'm busting the bubble of people who believe in democracy alone, but that is the reality. So this issue of resources that are going to the sector, and for sure we can't actually be able, there is no wiggle room to increase the amount allocated to the sector because it's already a lot. What needs to happen is to go back to those resources and ask, what is every shilling that is put into this sector doing? And is it doing what is priority to transform the sector? Because talk to the head teachers of schools that have junior school right now, and they'll tell you they have received books for French, and they don't have a French teacher. Why was it a priority to supply French books in schools where you know there's no French teacher? There's no one there who is even capable of reading the book.
Who supplied?
So we are at entrepreneur society, and I have never understood why that is so important and rears its head in almost every sector. So that if I know some and I need to supply papers here, it doesn't matter whether this studio has been digitized and doesn't require paper, I will still supply paper because Sam is here and is my friend. I think that needs to change so that every single shilling is audited in terms of what value it is bringing to the sector. And it's not just the head teacher. Sometimes we blame the schools. Those schools are straining massively because the money has been allocated and a significant part of capitation is actually not spent in the school. You spend elsewhere and then you're given records. And the records that you're receiving are telling you, we have bought this glass for you, we have bought this other thing for you, which you don't need, and you're still missing things you need. I think we need to also trust the school heads a bit more, give them some more leverage, but also, as Dr. Ari puts it, hold them to account. But first of all, allow them to manage the schools. Okay. When we try to manage the schools for them, and we allocate the resources meant for the schools on things that the schools don't need, and they miss the things they need, it becomes very difficult for the people managing schools.
Are those teachers properly equipped to manage an institution, or they're just basically teachers?
John and I were in Brazil last year, and we went to visit a school, and we had this conversation with the school head and the process that they go through to become a school head. You go through a set of 6 interviews, the last of which is psychometric assessment, to determine your fitness to run a school. So if we have heads who are not fit to run the school, we don't blame them. They say if you see a turtle on, they call them post turtles, you see a turtle on a post, don't wonder how it got there. Definitely it was put there because it can't climb. It was put there. So the person to question is who put it there. And what did they want to achieve by putting it on
Okay.
Yeah, I would not completely just blame the person who put it there, you know, because the one who is owning the possession also has a responsibility. And it is true that some books may be supplied which are not needed. But the question also is, do they have the other books that they need? And if you go to government, they'll say, yes, the books, you know, the ratio of books is 1:1. Do they have the teachers? Yes, do they have the teachers? Dr. Manyasa himself said they have even better teachers than in the academies. So there is an issue here. And I would not blame only on you know, top administration in government. Obviously, we have to start at Jogo House. Then go down to the county directors and others who have that responsibilities. Then go to the sub-counties, but also go to the school. So we need to have a national discussion, really, you know, about our public public school system and ask, you know, all of us as key stakeholders, all the way from down, including parents and teachers unions themselves can also be difficult because we have a system that is failing. And that system is a system that has got our majority of our children. And we cannot afford to condemn our kids because as you went to school, Dr. Getuko, you know, you and all of us, education is the only way for the poor to move up the ranks. You
just call me doctor.
No problem. You are smarter than a lot of them, so it's okay. Yeah, you know, say so in an interview. But the point I want to make is this. If you go to the rural areas, right now, Bwana Getuko, when we went to school and in a lot of the rural areas, rural people, you know, a lot of the poor, the only way out for them out of poverty is education. It's education. They don't have land that they can inherit. Their parents have sold all of it. They don't have businesses that they can, you know, they can grow. Right. It's only education. So if we deny them, the only equalizer that is possible, this is a big problem, and that's why I'm saying there needs to be a national dialogue. Okay. The blame is not just at the top. The blame goes all the way down. But we must address the predicament of all these children because we don't want to condemn you because you are poor. And it's getting to a point where in this country, it's like it's going to be a criminal offense to be poor. We have to address that problem. And that problem has to start with our public schools that are nurturing 90% of our young people that are expecting to be the future leaders of this country.
Sam, I just wanted to say something very brief.
Because I want to hear from Dr. Mugo.
Yeah, very brief. It is true that the school heads also have responsibility, and I cannot deny that. But you see, we have quality assurance officers across the country. If you go speak to them, they tell you, we don't have fuel, so we can't visit a school. So you are sent to a sub-county and you stay in that sub-county. And occasionally you call school heads and they give you some information to feed up the system. That's why I have a problem with the French books in a school where they are not needed, because that money could be fuel for the quality assurance officer to visit schools and provide the support that they are hired to support school managers and the teachers.
Dr. Mugo, so JSS, grade 7 has been in school. The learners have been in school for the whole year. We hear complaints that certain schools got just 2 teachers who are teaching 2 subjects in the humanity area. But in another 2 years, they should be transitioning to STEM. So those learners should be doing that. Then there's also a complaint that the intern teachers that were posted, they were supposed to be formalized, permanent and pensionable, but they're now being asked to renew their contracts. So we're just about to have 2 cohorts of junior school, or is it junior secondary school? What are we doing?
Yeah, again, we come back to the question of what are we doing. Of course, probably the one better thing that might happen for this cohort than now in this year that is ending is that there might be more teachers because now the primary school has moved now to fully be 6 years. And so there is a number of teachers that now would be moved to junior school. So there might be that hope. But then there is the issue of which teachers and which learning areas, because when you look at the curriculum of the junior school, there are certain learning areas that are specialized, and the teacher who is coming from primary school, even if they had graduated from Kenyatta University 7 years ago, so they have a B.Ed, they have not been teaching this way. And so it is not just about looking at whether I have a degree and a certain subject combinations and I was teaching in primary.
Right.
It's also the how of teaching and preparing them. So what we know is that unless if we take these things and treat them with urgency, it is likely to be worse than it has been, because KCPE has been playing an accountability role. We know now heads are rolling where children did not pass. You know, parents are asking, you know what happened and so on. So in the absence of this kind of a high-stake examination, many things now might happen, and so the only way, as Dr. Kilemi is saying, is tightening the accountability, but also looking at investments that need to be done and more urgently than others, because a good teacher, even under a tree and with no book, a good teacher will facilitate learning. So we need also to see how to appropriate the investment, because we have all agreed that Kenya is a role model, actually, not just in Africa, but globally, in terms of valuing education and investing, putting money. We have exceeded all the regional and global benchmarks for financing. So the money cannot be more. The money can only be used more, but better. But the one point we keep on running away from, and joining to the previous conversation, is values. It is not just about policies and having people in place and having head teachers and having all this. If that is not supported by human values, then we will continue complaining, even with whatever amount. And these things we keep on hearing, that there is a certain teacher or head teacher or a parent who supported children to cheat the examination. They are failing society. Right. And so that this value-based education and the fact that as adults, as leaders, those values have to be demonstrated for children to pick them up is also a very underlying issue that we must address.
I want us to begin to close so that tomorrow doesn't find us here. But if you're to look at those 39 years and the transitions that we've had, already there's a presidential working party report that recommended reducing the workload of what learners are being exposed to. But how do we safeguard the new system so that it's not abused, or reforms that could be politically driven erode the good intentions of such a system?
Yeah, so
let me go to Dr. Manyasa, then I can get to you.
Several things. One, we need to appreciate that education policy is political. And I think people have always been told, oh, don't play politics with this. If you don't politicize a political issue, it ends up working for a few. So it has to be politicized. And I think it's time to politicize education, make it a centerpiece for political discourse, so that people make certain commitments on what we have and say, I will only improve on this. Because Mwai Kibaki tried to create Vision 2030 that was a political document that would guide this country's economic and social growth, but it has been ignored and overridden by politics. So let us politicize what is important and make it a centerpiece for political discourse. And then get every actor to align. Or we tell those who don't want to align to make it known that they don't want to align. Because for as long as that doesn't happen, the challenge we have is that people come up with all manner of things. You have heard the story of comprehensive school, which now I hear people talking about so much. I am yet to see a single memorandum that was submitted by anyone I know who said, I want a comprehensive school. Where did it come from to feature in that report? Dr.
I'm curious to understand, what stories are you hearing?
Yeah, because everyone is talking about the comprehensive school now that will have ECD up to junior school.
Yep.
That violates our constitution, because how are we going to make the national government and county governments run this comprehensive school together when the constitution devolves ECD and leaves the rest of these levels to the national government? People haven't figured out how that constitutional question is going to be answered, but they're just talking about comprehensive school. And I'm not convinced that Kenyans submitted a memorandum and said we want a comprehensive school. I am not convinced. So that is an idea that someone invented. And it's not an idea that is, in my view, a very good one. So I feel that we need to confront our politicians and tell them, when we elect you, we put the future of the country in your hands. We will need to know your stand on this very pertinent issue of education, because that is the future of the country. We need to know your stand on everything that is going on around it.
Yeah, related to that, I started by saying that we did not prepare enough for this system. But that is not to say it cannot be improved. We didn't start well enough with 844. It was politically initiated. So the point now is for government to lead. And if we agree that an education system is as good as what you put in it, we can make the best out of this. We are with it. We have moved on. We can't go back. Resources have been put in there. And a lot of work has got into it, including trying to retool the teachers. So the question now is, what do we need to do? I think government has to take the lead. I think there needs to be a national conversation. In addition to this presidential working party, we need to sit together, all the key stakeholders, from the politicians to the Minister for Education, to the parents, to primary school ends, to teachers' unions, to members of parliament, to MCAs and so on, to say, look, we have this. It belongs to all of us. We all have a responsibility. The buck does not stop with the government or with the county director or just with the school principal or the teacher, because even the parents have to have some blame. So we need to discuss this and say, look, now that we've got this baby, what is the best way to make, what can we do to make sure that they succeed? And it is up to government to lead that process. And I am sure if government comes in and we all get committed and sit down and say, and even check where we have made mistakes and where we have not done our bit, and all agree that it is ours together, I think we can make the best of it and get the results that we would like. The system is great. I mean, especially that it's competency based. It doesn't stress so much on examinations. It prepares young people for different talents and so on, depending on what you are good at. But it will not be successful unless we all sit together as stakeholders, so that we don't feel it's pushed by so and so. It must be owned by all Kenyans and all key stakeholders in education, from the parent to the minister and to all of us that have an interest in education in this country.
Dr. Mugo, I want you to have the final word. If you look at the 844 that you're saying that you started with and you cannot recognize what you have today as 844, a bit of that focus has been reducing the workload. So when you look at CBC into the future, what would you like to see moving into improving it?
Yeah, and it's important to ask this question, discussing outcomes or results of KCPE. KCPE and KCSE are about answers, whether you got the correct answer or not. But the good education and what CBC is about the question. And we know actually that in learning, the question is more important than the answer, because it's not all questions that have one answer. And actually, most questions in life don't have a single answer. It's about opening the mind and growing the mind. And this is what I call the different way of educating. So as we move into the future, I think it's a call to teachers to take time. Like now, teachers are on 2 months holiday. Watch videos on competencies and what a better teacher does. So that as teachers we become better at doing this, because we carry such a heavy burden of responsibility for this generation. But also as parents, we are teachers of our children. There are so many things that parents can teach their children. So I think it is now opening up, the future is opening up education, so that it is not just the responsibility of one school, but it is a responsibility of the entire society. And as I go now, I'm going with actually more questions. Like we know some that 1,000, nearly 1,000 of those that had registered for this, did not sit, 9,000 actually. Yep. So what happened and who are they? We know that there are many who are under 12, 12 or under. So the policy of age, it's another question. There are so many questions, and as researchers, I think we bear the responsibility. And I'm glad to say that next week we'll be at Tom Mboya University in Homa Bay, because we have this EE4A conference that happens every 2 years. We try to look at what is evidence in education telling us, and what policies need to be questioned or improved depending on what evidence is evolving. So I think from next week's conference, we might be in a better position, both those that are in government and those of us researchers outside of government and those that are in the university, because we also carry a responsibility to have CBC succeed for our children into the future.
And would you know the explanation for why the class of 2023 is 14% higher than the previous? Despite looking at a trend that is between 1 or 2% change?
Yeah, for me, I'm carrying that as a question, but I want to believe that it's the mopping effect, that these ones had nowhere to go, and previously, even without the great reputation not allowed, we know that Standard 7 was a big bottleneck. That if you looked at the population of Standard 1 to 8, Standard 7 was still where the population was highest, and it's because we would return people's back that we consider not ready for KCPE. And this cohort had nowhere to go back. They have to keep moving with it. But I heard also stories of places where those parents that were scared of KCE, of CBC, moved their children to this cohort again.
Jumped a class?
Yes. They jumped a class. So I think, again, it's a question. I don't have data, but we hope that we can be helped also to answer these many questions.
Dr. Kilemi Muria, Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, Dr. John Mugo, thank you so much for making time for us. Thank you for the honor to call me a doctor.
You get there.
You get there.
All right. Up next is sports.